Paul George, History Miami. Rotate my phone. Can you all see and hear me? I'm hopeful. I've got a wonderful topic to share with you today, in fact, as part of our history presentation, virtual. And I just want to make sure you can see me. I think I'm on live, loud and clear, hopefully so, with a lot of help from my daughter, who's the executive producer, as well as Vanessa at History Miami. And what I want to talk about today, just kind of moving in chronological order, would be the early Spanish missions that were on the Miami River going back to the 1560s. But while we're waiting for maybe some people to join us, I thought maybe I would just talk in general about what we're doing here and what History Miami is. I've been part of History Miami since the 1980s, I'm pleased to say. Resident historian for the last many, many years, conducting tours, talks, editing to Cuesta for them for a long period of time. So it's family, it's my family, and during this time that we're essentially ensconced in our homes, we thought we'd bring some history to you. So this is like not only a virtual tour, but a portable tour. And we wanted to talk about the very, very rich textured history of the area. As a lot of you all know, because you've been on my tours, my talks, my classes, I'm a lucky guy to be able to share all this with you. We go back in terms of humanity in this area more than 10,000 years. In Deep South Day, we've been able to document that through archaeological evidence in the mid-1980s and thereafter. But also at the mouth of the Miami River, we really believe that the largest of the Tequestas, as the Spanish called the native Miamians, the largest of their villages was there. We know another large village was on the northern tip of Key Biscayne and then elsewhere too, all the way up to Broward County and deep west. And what I want to talk about is that big concentration then of Tequestas on the north bank of the Miami River, because that's what the Spanish targeted when the Spanish took control of Florida in 1565, based essentially at that point in today's St. Augustine. The man who made this control possible was a Spanish admiral, Pedro Menendez de Avalos, and he wanted to establish from today's South Carolina down around the Florida Peninsula, all the way up the Gulf Coast side, up to probably today's Alabama, a series of missions, one of which would be at the mouth of the river that he called Tequesta, which was a name that Juan Ponce de Leon gave to the native populations here because their leader was a man by that name of Tequesta. And Menendez then would see to it that a mission was established here in 1567. Actually, he laid the groundwork for it in 1566. A Jesuit, newly minted priestly and brotherly order, minted by the Catholic Church in 1540, founded going back to the 1520s, mid-1520s in Paris by Ignatius of Loyola, a Spanish warrior who became a devout Christian and later a saint in the Catholic Church. And so they established the mission then, led by a Spanish Jesuit brother, Francisco Villarreal, on the Miami River, North Bank. And it was underway by 1567. It was a short-lived mission, but it was very, very eventful. There were plays, actually a drama, comedies. There were Spanish soldiers. They'd actually kind of built a stockade, erected a cross in the center made out of probably a Dade County pine tree before it had a name like that. Converted a very small number of native Miamians who were taken to the great cathedral in Sevilla, Spain, where they were baptized into the Catholic religion at that time. But it's funny because Brother Villarreal encounters some of the same things that we do when we live in Miami in the summertime. He complained about the heat, humidity, and mosquitoes. In fact, allow me to put my glasses on for a second. I wanted to read to you a quote that he had to say about this. He said, and this is just a general quote, "I've been teaching doctrine to the Indians up to 15 years of age. Those who attend, most of them, know the 4 prayers and nearly all the commandments." Incidentally, this letter is in the archives of the Church of the Jesu in Rome. He complained about the heat and humidity, as I mentioned before, and the resultant sleepless nights. In fact, he said only by sleeping amid clouds of smoke could he endure. And yet, he did meet with some success. We mentioned the fact that a small number of natives were brought back to Sevilla and were baptized. He concluded this letter that we have on an optimistic note, predicting that, quote, some the Tequestas will be great Christians. And soon after that, the Spanish abandoned the mission. But in the next year, a newly converted, he was one of the five to be converted in Sevilla, a newly converted Tequesta Indian, Don Diego, who was a brother of Chief Tequesta, called again for a Spanish mission. And as a result of that, the Spanish brought the missionaries back. In fact, they brought a Father Sedano back who had been down in southwest Florida, ministering to the native Floridians in that area, the Calusa. And he established a mission with great optimism and a lot of hoopla at the beginning. But we know very little about it. He was summoned to St. Augustine, he put somebody in his place, and we don't have records of that mission. And it wouldn't be for another nearly 200 years until the Spanish established their third and final mission, and that was a mission they gave a name to, 1743, the Pueblo de Santa Maria de Loreto. And that was on the edge of land in today's downtown Miami. The original shoreline came in as close as about the what's called the Met Square complex, close to where Whole Foods is, as probably a more familiar directive. And we know that because Robert Carr, among others, did an archaeological dig in 1982 when they were clearing land to build the Wachovia Center. And Water's Edge would have been somewhere around where that parking garage is today for the Wachovia Center. That's all been filled going back to the 1920s. And there they had a very, very ambitious attempt to establish a mission. They brought over two Spanish Jesuit priests, a Father Olano, a Father Olano came first of all, and then he was joined by, oh my gosh, his name escapes me, Monaco. And they had great ambition. The problem was they took a census, I guess an early version of a census, and they found just 180 natives still there. And apparently they had long memories. A lot of history among native groups, of course, was passed down by the elderly. And what the elderly told them was, perhaps, that going back generations, what had been a very idyllic type of place had been kind of rudely interrupted by the Spanish entrada in the 1560s. And so there was a lot of hostility to these two missionary priests. Consequently, they decided to close the mission. In fact, I have here a part of a note from a Father Olano reporting to the governor of Cuba, a Spaniard who was the governor of Cuba, and asking permission of the king to close this third mission, which I always call a stillborn mission. And in this he said, "I believe the whole effort was fruitless and a waste of money because of the Indians' rootlessness and unadulterated fickleness," end quote. And the request was granted. Well, the reality is that the Spanish coming in over a period of a couple hundred years had really, in many ways, disrupted so much of the elements of this Native American culture at that time. So those would be, in a nutshell, the three attempts by the Spanish, meeting with very little success, to convert Native Americans to Roman Catholicism, and also to secure them as allies against anybody else who might want to take possession of that land. Meantime, I would like to just elaborate a little bit more on some of the other things that were going on there. And that is that at this time, we lose track or lose trace of the original native Miamis. In other words, by the latter part of the 1700s, within a generation of the missions closing down, there really isn't any trace of them. And as a consequence of that, we have very little people, very, very few people living in the Miami area. Instead, what we have would be a small community, some of whom were Bahamians, who began to rise along both banks of the Miami River. And that's kind of like the stage that's set for the early 1800s. When we come back tomorrow, we'll be talking about early Miami in the wake of these three Spanish missions to the Tequesta Indians. Thank you.